Friloda was the kind of place where people waved to each other from their porches, where church bells rang on Sunday mornings, and where secrets, when they did exist, were buried deep. On the surface, it was small-town America at its finest. Neighbors borrowed sugar, children played baseball in dusty lots, and everyone thought they knew everyone else's business. But behind closed doors, behind polite smiles, darkness had a way of festering. Marcus Wright knew all about secrets. To the outside world, he was a steady, hard-working man in his late 40s, the kind of father who had raised his son David to be polite, responsible, and proud. Folks at the diner greeted Marcus with respect, and the pastor often called on him to read a passage from the Bible during service. He wore the mask of respectability well. Yet when Marcus looked in the mirror, he didn't see a role model. He saw a man haunted by mistakes, carrying a disease that marked him as both guilty and doomed. David, on the other hand, was the town's golden boy. At 24, he had just landed a good job at a construction firm and was engaged to Elena Price, a young woman everyone adored. Elena's laugh could brighten a room. Her smile carried a warmth that softened even the hardest days. And when she and David walked hand in hand through the streets of Friloda, people whispered, "Now that's a couple made to last." Their wedding was just months away, and the buzz of anticipation surrounded them like perfume in the summer air. But Marcus's eyes often lingered where they shouldn't. At family dinners, when Elena leaned across the table to refill David's glass, Marcus noticed more than he should have. When Elena hugged him in greeting, her perfume lingered longer than it had any right to. He hated himself for it, cursed himself for being weak, but temptation clung to him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. One humid evening, when cicadas hummed in the distance and the town's streetlights glowed a dull orange, Marcus found himself alone with Elena. David had gone to pick up a part for his car, leaving her in the ride home to help Marcus's wife tidy up after supper. His wife slipped out to visit a neighbor, and in that small window of time, Marcus and Elena stood together in the dim light of the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, his voice low. "You know," Marcus said, his eyes narrowing slightly, "David doesn't realize how lucky he is." Elena shifted uncomfortably, setting a plate down with more force than she meant to. "He treats me well," she replied, her tone clipped, unsure where this was going. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "He does. But some men, they don't know how to keep a woman truly satisfied." The words hung in the air like poison. Elena froze, her heartbeat quickening, her mind racing. She wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as some tasteless joke, but the intensity in his eyes told her it was no joke at all. "Mr. Wright," she whispered, her voice shaking, "this isn't funny." Marcus smiled faintly, a smile that carried both charm and menace. "I'm not joking, Elena. I see the way you look at me sometimes. Don't tell me you don't feel it too." Her face flushed with anger and shame. "You're David's father. This is wrong. I love him." But the words didn't stop Marcus. He leaned in just a little closer, enough to make her retreat a step. "Love's complicated," he muttered. "Desire, that's simple." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed her purse, muttering something about needing to leave, and hurried toward the door. Her heels clicked against the floor like gunshots in the silence. Marcus stayed behind in the kitchen, staring at the reflection in the darkened window. His jaw tightened as he whispered to himself, "No one will ever know. Not David. Not anyone." And just like that, in the town of Friloda, where nothing ever seemed out of place, the seeds of betrayal had been planted. Seeds that would soon grow into tragedy. The night after that uneasy kitchen encounter, Elena tossed and turned in her bed, replaying Marcus's words in her mind. Desire, that's simple. She hated how they clung to her like smoke, unwanted but impossible to escape. She told herself it was nothing, that she had misunderstood, that Marcus was only teasing. But deep down, she knew better. The way he had looked at her wasn't teasing, it was hunger. Days passed, and she avoided being alone with him. She clung to David, clutched his hand tighter when they walked through town, kissed him longer when they said goodnight. But Marcus seemed to find ways to linger. A glance across the dinner table that lasted too long. A brush of his hand against hers when he passed the serving dish. A text late at night that made her heart stop. "You can't ignore what's between us." Elena stared at the glowing screen, horrified. She wanted to delete the message, to throw the phone across the room. Instead, trembling, She typed back, "This has to stop. It's wrong." His reply came within seconds. "Meet me tomorrow. Just talk. If you don't, David will know everything." Her stomach dropped. Panic clawed at her chest. Marcus was threatening her. He would drag David into this nightmare if she didn't comply. She felt trapped, a pawn in a game she never agreed to play. The following afternoon, she drove to the outskirts of town. The house Marcus had chosen was an abandoned property, its paint peeling, windows cracked, the smell of dust and mildew thick in the air. It was the kind of place people whispered about, a relic of a family long gone. Marcus was already there, leaning against the frame of the broken door, cigarette in hand. His smile was confident, predatory. "I knew you'd come," he said. Elena crossed her arms tightly, her voice low and shaky. "I don't want this. You're forcing me." Marcus flicked the cigarette to the ground, crushing it under his boot. "I'm not forcing you. You're here because you feel it too. Don't lie to yourself." She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I came because you threatened me. I love David. I'm marrying him." Marcus stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "And after you marry him? What then? You think you'll forget about me? About this?" He reached for her hand, and though she tried to pull away, his grip was firm. "You can't erase what's already begun." Elena's breath came fast, uneven. She wanted to scream, to run, but fear rooted her in place. In a moment of weakness, whether from fear, confusion, or the toxic pull of forbidden temptation, she let him kiss her. It was wrong, it was sickening, but it happened. When it was over, she pulled away violently, wiping her mouth as though she could erase the act itself. "Never again," she whispered, her voice cracking. "If you care about your son at all, you'll leave me alone." But Marcus only smirked, eyes glinting with triumph. "You think you're in control, Elena. You're not. One word from me, and David will see you for who you really are." Her heart shattered. She fled the house, stumbling over broken floorboards, running into the daylight with her chest heaving. She drove home with trembling hands, gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. That night, she curled into a ball on her bed, crying into her pillow until it was soaked. The guilt gnawed at her. She had betrayed David, the man who loved her with his whole heart. But worse than guilt was fear, the sickening knowledge that Marcus now held power over her, and that power could destroy everything. In the quiet of her room, Elena whispered a prayer into the darkness. "God, give me strength. Don't let this ruin us." But deep down, she knew the ruin had already begun. Weeks passed, and Elena tried desperately to lock away the memory of that afternoon in the abandoned house. She buried herself in wedding preparations, flower arrangements, dress fittings, choosing songs for the reception, anything to keep her mind from drifting back to Marcus's hands, his threats, the shame she carried like a scar beneath her skin. She smiled for David, laughed when his friends teased them about honeymoon plans, but inside she felt hollow. Then came the fatigue. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Planning a wedding was exhausting, she told herself. But soon, the tiredness grew heavier, dragging at her bones. Her appetite disappeared. Nights were restless, filled with sweats and chills that left her sheets damp. One morning, she stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her once glowing skin looked pale, her eyes ringed with shadows. She touched her face and whispered, "What's happening to me?" David noticed too. "You've been running yourself ragged," he said gently one evening as they sat on the porch. "Maybe it's just stress. After the wedding, it'll calm down." He reached for her hand, kissed her knuckles, his smile full of reassurance. She forced a smile back, but a gnawing dread had already taken root. Unable to ignore it any longer, Elena scheduled a doctor's appointment. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and fear, her heart pounding as she filled out the intake form. When the nurse asked if she wanted to be tested for anything specific, her throat went dry. The thought flashed through her mind like lightning. Marcus. She couldn't say it aloud, but deep down, she knew. The tests were routine, blood drawn, questions asked, but the wait was torture. Days stretched into eternity. Every ring of the phone made her jump. Every silence in the house felt suffocating. Finally, the call came. "Miss Price," the nurse said softly. "The doctor would like you to come in to discuss your results." Her legs nearly gave out. Nobody asked you to come in unless the news was bad. At the clinic, The doctor's expression said it all before he even opened his mouth. He set the folder on the desk, folded his hands, and sighed. "Elena," he said gently, "your results came back positive for HIV." Her world shattered. The room spun, the words echoing in her ears like a death sentence. She shook her head violently. "No, no, that's not possible. There must be a mistake." The doctor's voice remained steady but somber. "I'm afraid there's no mistake. We'll start treatment immediately. People live long lives with this condition, but it's important you understand. You are HIV positive." Elena broke. The sobs came hard, her body shaking as she covered her face with trembling hands. Images of David's smile, their wedding day, the children they had dreamed of, it all crumbled in that single moment. Shame burned hotter than fear. How could she look at him now? How could she ever tell him? After leaving the clinic, she sat in her car in the parking lot, rain pounding against the windshield. She screamed into the emptiness, her fists striking the steering wheel until they ached. Then she fell silent, staring blankly as raindrops blurred her reflection in the glass. The truth weighed on her chest like an anchor. She knew where this came from. She knew who had done this to her. Marcus. That night, she sat across from David at dinner, pushing food around her plate. He noticed her silence, the way she couldn't meet his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I need to tell you something. But not tonight. Not yet." David squeezed her hand, his face full of love and concern. "Whenever you're ready, I'll listen." Elena nodded, forcing a weak smile, but inside, panic screamed. How could she tell him the truth, that she was infected, and worse, that the man who gave her this disease was his father? The night dragged on, and when David finally fell asleep, Elena sat alone in the dark, whispering through tears. "God, forgive me. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed at all." And somewhere in the silence of that house, the ruin Marcus had begun was tightening its grip, ready to tear everything apart. Elena couldn't hold the secret any longer. Each night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside her, his arm draped across her waist, his breath steady and innocent. He had no idea that their perfect future had already been poisoned. The guilt was unbearable. One evening, after days of torment, she asked David to meet her on the porch after dinner. The cicadas droned in the summer heat, the porch light buzzing faintly above them. David leaned back in his chair, sipping iced tea, completely unaware that the woman he loved was about to rip his world apart. "David," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you say anything." He frowned, concerned. "Elena, you're scaring me. What's going on?" She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, forcing herself to speak. "I went to the doctor last week. I've been feeling sick, and they ran some tests." His face grew tense. "What did they find?" Tears welled in her eyes. "David, I tested positive for HIV." The glass slipped from his hand, crashing against the porch floor. He stared at her in disbelief, his face draining of color. No, that can't be true." "It is," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." He shot to his feet, pacing, his hands gripping his head. "So what are you telling me, Elena? That while I've been working my tail off to build us a life, you've been out there with someone else?" Her chest heaved as she tried to explain. "It was a mistake. I was scared. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." David turned on her, eyes blazing with hurt. "A mistake? You've ruined everything. You let someone touch you, and now we're supposed to get married? You let this happen." His voice cracked on the last word, anger and pain spilling out in equal measure. Elena sobbed. "I love you, David. I never stopped loving you. Please believe me." But he was beyond listening. He slammed his fist against the porch railing, splintering the wood. "Who was it? Tell me who." She froze, her lips trembling. The name sat like a blade on her tongue. She couldn't say it. Not yet. David's face twisted with rage. "You won't even tell me? God, Elena. I thought you were better than this." He stormed off the porch, the screen door slamming so hard it rattled the frame. Elena collapsed into the chair, sobbing into her hands, her engagement ring catching the porch light as though mocking her. Hours later, David sat at a bar on the edge of town, empty beer bottles lined up in front of him. Friends tried to console him, but he brushed them off, his eyes glassy with betrayal. "She was supposed to be my forever," he muttered. Now she's just another lie. Back at home, Elena knelt beside her bed, clutching her Bible, whispering broken prayers. God, help me. Give me courage to tell him the whole truth. Even if it destroys us, he deserves to know. But she knew the storm had only begun. David thought he was angry now, but once he learned who had truly betrayed him, who had stolen from him not just love but blood, his rage would become something far more dangerous. In the stillness of that night, Friloda's perfect couple lay shattered, and the foundation of an entire family was about to collapse. For 2 days, David shut Elena out completely. He didn't answer her calls, didn't reply to her desperate texts. He stayed at his cousin's house, nursing his anger with whiskey and silence. His friends had seen him angry before, but never like this. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the humiliation. The woman he had trusted with his heart had admitted she'd let someone else touch her, and now she carried a disease that would shadow her for the rest of her life. But anger has a way of demanding answers. By the 3rd day, David couldn't take the not knowing. He needed a name. He needed to look the man in the eye. He drove back to Elena's small apartment just after sunset. She was sitting on the couch, her face pale, her Bible open on her lap. When she saw him in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears. David, she whispered, rising to her feet. Please, let me explain. No, he snapped, slamming the door behind him. His voice was sharp, his jaw clenched tight. I don't want excuses. I don't want prayers. I want a name. Who is it? Her lips trembled. I can't. His laugh was bitter, hollow. You think you can destroy me, destroy us, and then hide behind silence? You're going to tell me, Elena, tonight. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It will kill you to know. Please don't make me say it. David stepped closer, his fists shaking at his sides. Say it. Her voice broke. It was Marcus. For a moment, David didn't understand. His face twisted in confusion. Marcus? Who the hell is Marcus? Elena's sob hitched in her throat. Your father. The room went silent. David staggered back as if she'd struck him. His eyes darted around the room, searching for proof that this was some cruel joke. But the way she looked at him, broken, ashamed, pleading, told him it was no lie. My father? His voice was barely a whisper, disbelief strangling the words. Elena nodded, sobbing. He forced me, David. He said he would ruin us if I didn't. I tried to stop it, but he wouldn't let me. And now I'm sick because of him. David's hands gripped the back of the chair, his knuckles turning white. His heart pounded in his chest, fury and nausea colliding. He could barely breathe. You're telling me, he said slowly, his voice rising with every word, that the man who raised me, the man who taught me right from wrong, the man I've looked up to my entire life, he's the one who did this to you? Elena reached for him, but he pulled back violently. David, I didn't want this. I was scared. He threatened me. Please believe me. But David was already shaking his head, his eyes blazing. Believe you? I believe you. That's the problem. Because now I can't unhear it. I can't unknow it. His voice broke, a raw edge cutting through. He destroyed everything. Elena collapsed to her knees, her sobs filling the room. I'm so sorry. David stood frozen, torn between rage and heartbreak, staring at the door as though he could already see his father on the other side of it. The silence stretched until it suffocated them both. Then he whispered, more to himself than to her. He's going to pay. And with that, he turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him like a gunshot. Elena cried out after him, but her voice was swallowed by the night. In that moment, David wasn't just a betrayed fiancé. He was a son whose very bloodline had turned into his worst enemy. And he was a man who would no longer stop at words. David drove aimlessly for nearly an hour after leaving Elena's apartment. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. Every memory of his father, teaching him to ride a bike, clapping for him at football games, offering advice about women, felt poisoned now, tainted by the sick truth. How could the man he idolized commit something so vile? By the time David pulled into his parents' driveway, his body shook with fury. The porch light cast a yellow glow across the familiar front yard, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like enemy territory. He slammed the car door and marched up the steps. The front door creaked open before he could knock. Marcus stood there, casual as ever, a drink in his hand, the faint smell of whiskey hanging around him. David, Marcus said, smiling faintly. Didn't expect you tonight. David's chest heaved. He stepped inside, his eyes locked on his father. We need to talk. Marcus raised a brow. Sounds serious. He gestured toward the living room. Sit down. What's got you all worked up? David didn't sit. He stood rigid, his voice low and shaking. It's Elena. Marcus's smile faltered just slightly, but he covered it with a sip of whiskey. What about her? David's eyes burned. Don't play dumb. I know. She told me everything. The glass froze halfway to Marcus's lips. For the first time, his mask slipped. Everything, he asked carefully. That you touched her. That you threatened her. That you gave her HIV. David's words cracked like a whip. Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Marcus set the glass down slowly, his jaw tightening. Then he chuckled darkly. So she finally told you. David's fists clenched. You don't even deny it? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold. Deny what? That I'm still a man. That temptation gets the better of us all. Don't act like you've never looked at someone you shouldn't. You were supposed to protect me, David spat. Protect her. You're my father, damn it. Marcus stood now, closing the distance between them. I'm your father, yes. And I've sacrificed everything for you. But I'm still human. Don't put me on a pedestal you built in your head. David's voice rose, trembling with rage. You ruined her. You ruined us. You destroyed everything we had. Marcus's eyes hardened. She wanted it too, David. Don't let her play innocent. Women, they know how to use guilt like a weapon. The words snapped something inside David. He lunged forward, shoving Marcus against the wall. Picture frames rattled as the force shook the house. Don't you dare blame her. David roared, his face inches from his father's. You were supposed to be a man of honor. You were supposed to be my hero. Marcus shoved back, his strength surprising for his age. Grow up, boy. Heroes don't exist. I did what I wanted, and she let me. That's the truth. Tears stung David's eyes, but fury drowned them out. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his voice low and dangerous. You're not my father anymore. You're a monster. Marcus sneered. Careful what you say, son. Words like that, you can't take them back. At that moment, Elena burst through the front door, her face streaked with tears. Stop, she screamed, rushing between them. Please, stop this before it goes too far. But the fire in David's eyes was already past the point of no return. His hand slipped toward his waistband, where the cold metal of a pistol pressed against his side. He hadn't planned on using it, but now, it felt inevitable. Marcus saw the motion, his smirk fading. For the first time, fear flickered across his face. David's voice cracked as he raised the weapon, tears streaming down his cheeks. You took everything from me, and I won't let you take anything else. The room was frozen in that instant. Elena sobbing, Marcus staring down the barrel of his own son's rage, and David trembling on the edge of an irreversible choice. The house, once a home filled with laughter and family dinners, now held only betrayal, fury, and the smell of spilled whiskey. And then came the silence, heavy and suffocating, before the storm broke. The living room was still, but the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind that squeezes the air from your lungs and makes your heart pound like a war drum. David stood trembling, his pistol raised, every muscle in his body locked between rage and despair. Marcus raised his hand slowly, not in surrender, but in mockery. You really think you've got the guts, son? To kill your own father? His voice carried that same arrogance that had once passed for confidence when David was a boy. Now it sounded like poison. Stop it, Marcus. Elena cried, standing between them, her arms outstretched. This doesn't have to happen. Please, just stop. But Marcus sneered. Let him do it, Elena. He wants to feel like a man. Let's see if he's got it in him. David's vision blurred with tears. His finger tightened on the trigger. Every memory came rushing back. Marcus teaching him how to shave, clapping from the bleachers, patting his back after his first heartbreak. But those memories collided with the truth. Marcus had taken the woman he loved, infected her, and laughed about it. You're not my father anymore, David whispered, his voice breaking. You're just the man who destroyed me. In a desperate attempt, Elena grabbed David's arm, her voice frantic. David, no. If you pull that trigger, you can't take it back. You'll lose everything, your freedom, your future. Please, think. But David was past thought. He was raw nerve, bleeding fury, a storm with no escape. Marcus leaned forward, his voice a taunt. Then pull it. Do it, boy. Show me you're not weak." The sound that followed was deafening. One gunshot, sharp and final, shattered the room. Marcus staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. He pressed his hand against his chest where crimson bloomed across his shirt. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, a low, rattling gasp escaped him as his body collapsed onto the floor. The glass of whiskey tipped over, spilling across the carpet, mingling with his blood. Elena screamed, falling to her knees beside David, who still held the smoking gun, his face pale as ash. His breath came in ragged bursts, his whole body trembling as though he'd just awakened from a nightmare. "Oh God! Oh God! What have I done?" he muttered, staring at his father's lifeless form. Elena clutched his arm, sobbing. "David, listen to me. We have to call the police. We can't hide this." David shook his head violently, panic rising. "No. They'll take me away. They'll lock me up forever. They'll take you anyway if we don't call," she said, her voice desperate. "Please, David, don't make this worse." He sank into the couch, the pistol slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. His eyes never left Marcus's body. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "I just wanted him to admit what he did. I just wanted him to be sorry." But Marcus had never been sorry, and now he never would be. The wail of sirens pierced the night air, faint at first, then growing louder. Neighbors must have heard the shot. Lights flicked on across the street, shadows gathering at windows as Friloda's quiet suburb turned into the scene of a tragedy. Elena buried her face in her hands. "It's over, David. It's over." But David knew it wasn't. The gunshot hadn't ended anything. It had only begun the unraveling. His father was dead, his future in ruins, and the woman he loved still carried the disease that tied them forever to the man lying lifeless on the floor. The siren stopped outside. Doors slammed. The heavy footsteps of police officers pounded toward the house. David closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. "I killed my father," he whispered, "and nothing will ever be the same." When the front door burst open, red and blue lights flooding the room, David raised his hands slowly, surrendering not just to the law but to the weight of a legacy broken beyond repair. The story of Marcus Wright's death spread through Friloda faster than wildfire. A respected man, gunned down by his own son in the family living room. It was the kind of scandal that shook a small town to its core. People whispered in diners, congregated on church steps, and debated whether David Wright was a cold-blooded killer or a broken man pushed too far. When the trial began, the courthouse overflowed. Reporters set up cameras on the lawn, sketch artists sharpened pencils, and neighbors pressed their faces to the windows, desperate to witness the fall of the Wright family. Inside, the air was tense, thick with the weight of judgment. David sat at the defense table, dressed in a plain navy suit. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders heavy as though carrying the ghosts of both his father and his future. Beside him, his attorney whispered strategies, but David barely seemed to hear. His gaze drifted off into the gallery, where Elena sat, her face pale and drawn, hands clasped tight in her lap. The prosecutor rose first, painting David as a murderer. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice firm. "This case is not about secrets or excuses. It is about a son who chose to play executioner." Marcus Wright was unarmed. He posed no immediate threat, yet his son pointed a gun and pulled the trigger. "That is murder." David lowered his eyes, shame burning his cheeks. Then came the defense. David's attorney stood tall, his voice steady. Marcus Wright was no innocent victim. Behind the facade of a family man, he was a predator who preyed on his own son's fiancée. He infected her with HIV. He used threats and manipulation to keep her silent. When David confronted him, Marcus taunted him, mocked him, and dared him to pull the trigger. This was not cold-blooded murder. This was the breaking point of a young man betrayed in the deepest possible way by his own father. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some gasped in horror, others shook their heads in disbelief. The judge pounded the gavel, calling for order. When Elena took the stand, the room held its breath. She walked slowly, her steps unsteady, but her voice carried the weight of truth. "Marcus Wright wasn't the man you all thought he was," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He cornered me, threatened me. I was too afraid to fight him, too ashamed to tell David. And when I finally found the courage, it was too late. I was sick. And David, David was broken by the truth. Her words painted the picture of a family destroyed by secrets. She spoke of late-night texts, of Marcus's threats, of the terror that lived inside her every day. The jury leaned in, captivated, horrified. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor tried to poke holes. "Miss Price, are you telling this jury that David had no choice but to kill his father?" Elena's voice shook, but her answer was firm. "I'm telling you Marcus left him no choice but to hate him. David didn't plan this. He snapped. And anyone who loved me the way he does might have snapped too." David's attorney rested a comforting hand on his shoulder. But David couldn't lift his head. He could still hear the gunshot, still see his father's blood pooling on the floor. Closing arguments thundered through the courtroom. The prosecutor called David a murderer who should face life behind bars. The defense pleaded for mercy, reminding the jury that Marcus had betrayed not just his son, but the entire town. When the jury retired to deliberate, the room buzzed with anticipation. Hours passed like days. Finally, they returned, their faces grave. The foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of voluntary manslaughter." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was not murder, but neither was it freedom. David's fate was sealed, yet the weight of it felt almost merciful compared to what it could have been. The judge's gavel fell. Elena wept openly. David sat motionless, his lips whispering a single word: "Sorry." The gavel struck, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like a final heartbeat. David sat frozen, barely processing the words that would shape the rest of his life. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't the death sentence of a murder conviction either. Still, the weight of it pressed down on him like chains. Elena wept openly in the gallery, her hands shaking as she clutched a crumpled tissue. She had told the truth. She had given David every ounce of her testimony, every painful detail. But nothing could undo the reality. Marcus was dead, David was headed to prison, and she remained marked by an illness that would shadow her forever. As the bailiff led David away in handcuffs, he turned his head toward her. Their eyes met, his hollow and resigned, hers drowning in grief. "I'm sorry," he mouthed, though no sound reached her. Then he disappeared behind the heavy doors, swallowed by the justice system. The weeks that followed dragged Friloda through a storm of gossip and debate. Some called David a murderer who should rot in prison. Others whispered that Marcus had deserved worse. At the diner, at church, even in the grocery store aisles, people argued over what justice truly meant. But for Elena, the noise outside didn't matter. Her world had been reduced to two unbearable truths. The man she loved was behind bars, and the father-in-law who had destroyed her was buried in the ground. Marcus's funeral was a pitiful affair. A few distant relatives showed up, their faces stiff with shame. The pastor spoke hollow words about forgiveness and hidden struggles, but the pews sat nearly empty. When the casket was lowered into the ground, there was no wail of grief, no trembling hands reaching for one last touch. Only silence and the sound of dirt hitting wood. In contrast, the day David was transported to state prison, the courthouse steps were crowded. Protesters shouted on both sides, some holding signs demanding justice for Marcus, others declaring David a victim of betrayal. Elena walked through the chaos with her head bowed, the whispers slicing at her like knives. She didn't defend herself. She didn't defend David. She had no energy left. Prison life hardened David quickly. Letters from Elena became his lifeline. She wrote about her doctor visits, about the medication she now had to take daily, about the nights she cried herself to sleep. She never asked for pity, never complained, but her words bled with sorrow. And David wrote back, pouring out his regret, confessing how the gunshot replayed in his mind every night. "I killed my father," he wrote once. "But sometimes I wonder if he killed us first." Months later, Elena stood in front of a small community group at the local church basement. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. She told them about Marcus, about the hidden abuse, about the price of silence. People listened, horrified, some with tears in their eyes. "Secrets destroy families," she said softly. "They almost destroyed me. They did destroy David. And they killed Marcus." It was the first time she felt her pain could serve a purpose. Back in prison, David sat on his bunk, staring at the letter she had sent about that meeting. He closed his eyes, imagining her voice, the way her courage sounded like light in the dark. For the first time since the shooting, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could still hold meaning, even if it was from behind bars. Friloda would never forget what happened in the Wright family's living room. It became part of the town's identity, a whispered cautionary tale told to remind people that sometimes the worst monsters aren't strangers at all. They live under your roof. They sit at your dinner table. They smile at church. And in the quiet of his cell, David whispered into the dark, "I'll carry this forever." But at least the truth isn't buried anymore.